Hey Bear Buddies, thanks for joining me for volume 37 of Furberries Fables. If you like it, please hit the like button down below and leave a comment to help my channel out. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I currently have a subscriber goal of hitting 200 by Halloween. Today's story is Home by Reddit user AlexHix. What a task, to be left looking after my decrepit grandmother. Well, not so much look after and more so go and check on her daily in the care home she was in. Placing her in the care home was a necessity as my parents were leaving the country for a few months and I was incapable of taking care of a seemingly lifeless body. She needed to be fed by hand, bathed, stretched, and put to bed. On many an occasion, I watched my father gently lift spoonfuls of mashed food to her mouth, only for her to gum the sustenance and let the rest fall from her mouth. He would then clean her ever so carefully, lift her from her wheelchair, and put her into her bed to sleep. Her eyes always creeped me out. She didn't speak or move. Parkinson's disease stripped her of any ability to do things for herself. That, coupled with dementia, was a recipe for a burden. As lifeless and incapable she was of moving, her eyes would always dart around and survey the room. Her stare haunted me. She looked so deep into my soul I almost felt the paralysis she was riddled with. The constant care for her 24 hours a day was the reason she had to go to the home. There was no way in hell I could give her the care my dad and the in-house nurses gave her. Another reason I definitely couldn't look after her was because she would act out. She came across as paralyzed, would be dead weight when we would lift her to prevent bed sores. But on occasion she would stick her leg out when she was being wheeled into the bedroom and impede the nurse from wheeling her easily into the room. Her animosity towards my mother was ever so present. She had always hated my mother, my theory being that she felt this woman had taken her son from her. If my dad wasn't home and my mom fed her, she would spit the food at my mother as she tried to feed her. My mother was patient, but the spitting grew too much and she left it to Dad. I digress. My parents were going on a 1-month trip to Malaysia and found the ideal place for her to be looked after. Everyone they talked to said this facility was the best you could get. There were even permanent residents who had little sectioned houses with gardens and live-in nurses. Due to it being a short stay, dear old grandma was going to stay in a shared room with 3 other haggard shells of humans. The air felt of loneliness. As we drove in, I could feel the deep, soul-searching stares of the elders as they sat on garden chairs observing us. As we walked to the room, they all chimed up and greeted us, proclaiming I looked like a relative of theirs. You could feel the desperation for conversation in the way they almost threw themselves at us as we walked. We arrived at the very plain room, 4 beds in 2 rows and nothing else. Gran was put on one of the beds, given a hug by Dad, and that was it. Once my parents left, it was my duty to drop in every day to check on her and make sure she was being looked after. Going there by myself was horrid. Driving up the winding path with the overgrown trees blocking out the sun, it felt as if I was driving into literal darkness, the abyss. I parked the car in the bay right in front of the reception. There were no other cars, and so I was spoiled for choice. No sooner had I exited the car when a group of elders appeared and started asking who I was and who I was there to see. A gentleman playing chess looked up and implored I spare a moment to have a game with him. I could see his bones through his pale, loose skin. He had virtually no muscle. He was literally skin and bone. I politely declined and walked toward Gran's room. I entered her room and was mortified. She seemed to have aged at least a decade since the day before and looked extremely similar to the skeleton that had asked for a game of chess. I looked around for a nurse to find out what had happened and could not find any. I went to the reception area and was flocked by the geriatrics asking who I am and if I could sit and chat. Discovering the reception to be empty, I decided to go back and take a picture of Gran to send to Dad and ask him what to do. She was no longer there. Well, her body was, the shell of the woman she used to be. She looked so depleted I worried that a strong wind would disintegrate what remained of her. To my horror, I heard my name come from the crowd that had followed me into the room. It was Gran's voice. The voice grew louder as I could see a figure making its way through the horde. As the crowd bumped and shifted, the figure began to change. The old hags that had been following and talking to me began to change. Their skin started peeling, their hair fell out in clumps, and their teeth fell out as they asked their incessant questions. Their skin seemed to rot, and the horde that stood in front of me was now a mass of decayed flesh and bones protruding from sections of skinless body. My name was finally as loud as it could be, and Gran was in front of me. Her shell lay behind me, while her other form starting slowly decaying before my eyes. Her sunken face distorted and seemed to melt as her bones disintegrating and left a flailing ghoul. I'm lost, Alex. I saw the light and walked towards it, but I left my body and I can't go to the light. Help us, get me out of here. The screams pierced my ears. This wasn't an elderly home. This was a purgatory of sorts, and I was now surrounded by these things trying to move on. It explained the intense gazes they all had, as well as the reason there was no other visitors. Those foolish enough to come visit a relative seemingly became a vessel for at least one of the souls to inhabit and move back into the human world. The terror I felt was beyond anything I had ever experienced. If I couldn't think of a way out, I was going to become one of them. Who would get my body? Where would my essence go? Would I be stuck in purgatory with these ghouls waiting for someone that I could then possess to get out? I made the sign of the cross, closed my eyes, and pushed my way through the crowd. I had to get to my car and get out. This is it. Hey Bear Buddies. Thanks for listening to Volume 37 of Furberries Fables. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please stay tuned because Part 2 of this story is coming on Friday. Also, I've recently started a Patreon account, which you can find the link for down below. Any support you'd like to give would be greatly appreciated, but of course is not expected. I also have a merch store which you can check out if you feel like getting yourself some awesome Furberries merchandise. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you have a great day.